It's been the most alarming set of stats I've encountered since I came to politics.
New Zealand has the worst school attendance when compared to our neighbours and friends, Australia, the UK, even the United States. The government is calling it a truancy crisis and has unveiled an attendance plan to get students back to school.
Attendance is a major problem for us here in New Zealand. The numbers are shameful. There's no other way to describe it. I can tell you 54% of our kids are not in school with regular school attendance. And that may seem like it's not a biggie. It is a biggie, because by the time they get to 15, they've actually lost 1 year's worth of education and are further behind. We've got a clear goal. We want 80% by 2030 to be at school 90% of the time.
Starting from the beginning of Term 2, schools will be required to publish attendance data weekly, moving to daily reporting at the start of next year. There will be updated public health advice so children aren't kept home sick as often, and a traffic light system is being developed to monitor students' attendance records.
School principals have mixed responses to the action.
Don't know how you could call it the plan. To be quite honest, from the days when I was in rural education and in country schools, this thing's about as much use as tips on a ball. It's not going to do anything. And it shows that this guy who thinks he knows everything knows bugger all nothing.
I think the focus on attendance is really good. It's a very important issue facing New Zealand education.
Kia ora, I'm Tom Kitchen, and today on The Detail, we talk to three principals about whether the government's plan to fix our truancy problem will work, and if not, what will. First, here's Vaughan Quio. He's the principal of Papatoetoe High School in Auckland, and he's also president of the Secondary Principals Association of New Zealand. He explains how we keep track of attendance data in 2024 and what counts as truancy.
So most schools now would have some sort of student management system, and on that student management system you can mark your attendance electronically. Recently, there's been requirements to send that data through on a term-by-term basis, and that's just a file export system. You push a button, it crunches the numbers in the background, and off it goes. It's not a particularly challenging task to get that data to the ministry. Prior to it being a bit of a focus, it's an in-house thing, it's an operational thing, so it just stayed in-house. We look at attendance data regularly from a school perspective, probably more at the individual level. We'll be looking at what Vaughan's attendance is and how we need to intervene if his attendance rate gets a bit squishy. And there's all sorts of notifications and things that beep and bing when someone's attendance gets to a certain level. So you're talking about, in a secondary space, you're talking about deans, you're talking about deputy principals getting involved when it gets a little bit chronic, and then referrals to outside agencies.
Did the ministry give you feedback on that? Like, did they say, oh, your attendance rate's great, or, oh, that's really bad, you need to do something about that?
They don't give me qualitative feedback. What they do is they crunch those numbers and present it in a way that is consistent across all schools. So they don't give me an opinion. They give me the data back in another format.
Right. Okay, so this is the current situation now. So the ministry publishes national data every term, but the government now wants to change it to make that pretty common, right? Like every week?
School attendance rates will be published every week starting next month as part of a government crackdown on truancy.
Absolutely. If they're looking to gather and publish information that is systemic, that is about weekly attendance, so that everyone can get in behind the national as in New Zealand, not national as in party. If they want to get in behind the national drive to getting everyone back to school, then having something to look at and go, hey, we're doing better or we're not doing quite so well, much like looking at an inflation rate, then sometimes the truth will set you free and the data is useful. If there's going to be a set of league tables about, Papatoetoe High School is running in at 86% daily attendance and Manerehau High School is running in at 86.2, that is unlikely to be helpful because the two contexts of those schools are quite different.
And they want to make it daily from next year.
Yeah, it also is not going to provide you with the clarity of data that you want. So, for example, if I'm a maths teacher, period 3, and I'm looking at my class and I mark that Vaughan is away, I don't know why he's away. I haven't had the chance to connect with Vaughan's family. I haven't received a response. And sometimes there is a lag with regard to comms from families. And so for a day or two, things can genuinely be unknown. And so if you want that data to be clean, my advice and my experience, having worked in the sector for quite some time, is you can really only go down to weekly data from a granular perspective.
Yeah, that hasn't been approved yet. I mean, that's a proposal that the Associate Minister of Education, David Seymour, is planning to take to Cabinet. But do you think a week is feasible? I mean, that's not going to add too much strain on your staff?
I think we have to acknowledge that for some reason our society has developed this slight apathy towards school attendance. We need to do something about that. With regard to the electronic systems we have in place, we can click a button, we can produce a file, and we can email it off. It's just about what that data is going to be used for and how helpful it's going to be. Standing up and pointing out, oh, look, you're bad with your attendance rate, isn't actually going to help the attendance rate. It doesn't sort of work like that. If it's used nationally as a cohort analysis or a regional analysis and anonymised, then it's actually probably going to be more useful than your old mugs gallery or rogues gallery on the supermarket wall of people we won't let into the store. You know, it's making league tables and making judgments about whether my school's better than the one up the road based on our attendance data is not going to be helpful, because my community is significantly different to the community at, say, Burnside High School in Christchurch, and you simply cannot compare the two in terms of what good looks like.
Well, let's talk about that. What are the reasons? You talk about there being a bit of a social apathy or something like that for attendance at school. Why do you think that's changed over time? I mean, we can always just blame the pandemic, but there's got to be something more than that, right?
Oh, absolutely. That exacerbated an existing issue, the pandemic, right? And the languaging, which at the time was appropriate, of stay home, stay safe, and all that sort of thing. Don't go out if you're not well, and all that sort of thing. That's appropriate in a pandemic time, but it's easy to get hooked on that message, and habits don't take long to form when they require you to do less. And so we need people to get back outside and re-engage. And that was relatively sluggish in 2022. But for certainly what I'm seeing on my campus, daily attendance is in the mid to late 80s for me, which, given the community that we serve and the disadvantage they experience, is actually really, really good. And it's sort of bounced right back. And so when you've got high daily attendance, that doesn't necessarily translate into high regular attendance. Because again, if you're away for a week because you've been sick, then you only need another half day somewhere, and suddenly you don't count in the regular attenders. Because regular attendance is only 5 days in a term that you can be away. And we all know if you get a pretty meaty douse of the flu, or you break your ankle or something at rugby on the weekend, that it takes you a few days to get your mojo back.
And there's a real conflation between being at school or attendance and truancy, isn't there? I mean, even the government, for example, said in its press release that it's taking action to address the truancy crisis and raise attendance by delivering the attendance action plan. So even the government seems to have conflated these two things, but there is a difference, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. So my daughter was unwell last week. She had a day where she was at home in bed getting over whatever she was getting over. She's not truant. She's absent from school, yes, and we would have sent a note in, much like many parents across the country, justifiably away from school. That lowers our attendance rate. And so we have to make sure we know what it is we're talking about, and what it is we're trying to weigh and measure, and what it is we're trying to fix. If we're trying to fix truancy is where Vaughan walks out of his house, his parents and the teachers, all the grown-ups in his life, think Vaughan's going to school, and instead of turning left and heading off to school, he turns right and heads off to the local dairy, the skate park, or the mall, or something, and gets on a train and goes somewhere else. So truancy is the active avoidance of school, as opposed to I can't attend for other reasons.
Has truancy become more common over time? Do we have a truancy crisis?
What we've got is an increased willingness and an increased acceptance from the community to not be at school. So I think the recent Aero thing, the research that came out, showed that about 75% of adults surveyed were okay with a less than 90% attendance rate at school.
The Education Review Office, in a recent review, found that almost 3/4 of parents are comfortable with their child missing 1 week a term or 10% of their school.
They were quite comfortable with heading off overseas a week or two early at the end of a term to get cheaper airfares, be that a holiday or visiting family. They're okay for the odd duvet day, if someone just is having a tough time that day. So it's not necessarily about truancy. And when you look at recent ministry figures, I do also believe that the largest contributor to absenteeism is still explained medical absence.
So it seems like we're targeting the wrong things here.
Not necessarily. We should be targeting people's attitudes to school. In some cases, if it's the 16-year-old turning right instead of left, that person needs to be motivated to get their butt to school, basically, rather than choosing to disengage. But then also, and a degree of what Minister Seymour is saying is right. What is a reasonable reason to say that they don't have to come to school today? There's my own teenagers, a couple of times have said, look, I just can't be bothered. I just feel a bit run down. I don't want to go to school today. Swiftly, the duvet has been removed from the bed. The uniform has been chucked at them, and all sorts of insistence to get themselves off to school, because I'm invested and know how important education is. What we need to make sure is that thought process happens in the hearts and minds of all of the parents. Actually, it's easy as a parent to go, okay, I don't want the fight, stay in bed. But it's actually more detrimental.
So how exactly would David Seymour's proposed traffic light system work?
We envisage it would be student-based and therefore family-based. Obviously, if a particular school had a lot of students who were deemed to be red light, then in that instance, I think you'd be asking, is there something that needs to be done at the school level? But also just hasten to emphasise that the Cabinet hasn't actually agreed on the exact details of that part of the policy.
Here's what Vaughan thinks of it.
The devil's in the detail of that, right? So if we're talking about applying a traffic light system to an individual where Vaughan's a student at school, his attendance is great, he's flagged as green by the school and can carry on, or Vaughan's attendance is starting to slip, he's flagged as orange, as in the school will be dealing with Vaughan because his attendance is not at the point where external agencies are needed to be there. And then Vaughan's really chronic, the school have tried everything, we need to get community support, he's a red. That's quite a different conversation to this school is performing well, green, this school could do better, orange, this school sucks, red. If that's about engaging external agencies to help address the complicated issues that contribute to attendance, you could call it a traffic light system, you can have numbers attached to it, actually you can call it whatever you want. The heart of it is, when schools are unable to intervene any further because the issues around attendance are more societal and systemic, we need to have not only capacity but capability to access external agencies to do the lifting to get those people back to school. We know that where it has worked, it's a community response using community people to resolve those community issues. You can't just get a person in an attendance officer's monogrammed car driving up to a house, knocking on the door and assuming that the door will open for them. So as simple as who the person is that goes to approach the family to say, hey, Vaughan's mum, why isn't Vaughan coming to school? Where the community is socioeconomically disadvantaged, they're less likely to trust the monogrammed car in the driveway. And so you have to have meaningful community relationships. They have to know the person who's coming to talk to them. Attendance improves when the family are engaged and understand the value of regular daily attendance. If you haven't got family buy-in, it is a significant uphill struggle. What there needs to be is empowerment for those local decisions to be made, but also making sure that the resourcing that is available, and I understand there's not going to be more in the pot, gets to the right place and doesn't get stripped out through administrivia in the middle. And so that means we're going to try and get bang for our buck. Get it into schools, get it as close to people like me as you can, so that we can deploy resources in a way that are targeted for the needs of the kids that we're dealing with in front of us.
Ash Main Donald agrees. He's the principal of Western Heights Primary School in West Auckland, and he spoke to my colleague Nathan Raredi, who hosts RNZ's First Up. Ash says the solution to poor attendance isn't gimmicky quick fixes, but rather giving schools proper resources to help students.
I'd really like to talk about an issue that I think impacts attendance, an issue that really the government has not even mentioned, that I think deserves a big focus. I would say it's quite possible that some children don't want to attend because of the huge challenges that our explosion of neurodiverse children are posing in class every day. So I'm on the Waitakere Area Principals Association exec. Every principal I speak to, as soon as the topic comes up, there is just a litany of war stories that they are sharing. It is front and centre. It's top of mind for them. It certainly is having an impact on children and their attendance, and it's certainly an area that requires urgent government focus. Rules, regulations, red tape, gimmicky red traffic lights aren't going to make a difference for our neurodiverse children. Can I give you a little list of just some of the things we're dealing with?
Yeah.
2 children who are completely non-verbal in any language. 2 have been at school over a year, but are very, very early verbal, toddler level at best. A considerable number of children who are not toilet trained. I've got 2 children who at times just can't tolerate clothes.
Is it because they're included in the statistics now, and that means that you're kind of fighting a losing battle here from the start, or do you think it puts other kids off coming?
It does make it hard for other children. We don't say they are challenges, but we say they present a challenge, and it's a massive cost. We spend half our operational budget on support staff who are not ministry funded to look after these children. And there will be children who, will not be overly keen to put up with some of the things that they're having to put up with. And that's what really needs addressing.
As I listen to these, funding seems to be the first area to start, does it not?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you think about it this way, that half the money that I've got available to me to run my school, that's not paying teachers or whatever, they're covered by central funding. But half the money that I've got available to me to run my school is paying for these incredible salt of the earth people to come in and day after day just exhibit patience and tolerance and kindness and empathy and persistence and just do it day after day. We provide a special place for those children to go to get away from the overstimulating environments that they are in for part of the day. There's a huge amount more that we do beyond just funding support staff, but the government needs to take a big look at what they do and what they prioritise and say, hey, let's forget some of this gimmicky stuff and get some of this real core business stuff sorted, like a teacher aide in every class, every day, all day. And then you will find that schools, being the self-managing wonders that they are, they'll be able to free up other resources to get out into the community and to get out into the homes and to get those children in, because it's people who have a relationship with those families in our community who are going to be able to have the most success interacting with them.
Last month, for another episode, I met Principal Belinda Johnston from Somerville Special School, where students have a range of disabilities. I called her to see what impacts attendance at her school and what might help.
By this government's sort of measurements, we would be less than acceptable.
Did it get a little bit worse for you around COVID?
It was really bad over COVID. What happened was lots of our children do have medical conditions and other vulnerabilities and are affected by change as well, so they get really anxious. So around COVID times, our attendance rates dropped right down, and it did take a long time for parents to feel comfortable that it was safe for their children to come back to school, and also for learners to get back into that mindset of coming back into school, because when you have an intellectual disability and other challenges, change is a big deal.
Why might be the main reasons these days why learners, as you call them, or students, might not attend at your school?
Lots of different reasons, but some examples might be getting a chest infection or a cold. Many of our learners have respiratory conditions, so they can end up in hospital very, very quickly and regularly. So what is a common cold for the rest of us is a very serious, life-threatening condition for some of our learners. Many of our learners have regular seizures, multiple a day, sometimes dozens a day, and that takes its toll on the body. And sometimes it's actually the families that are recovering because there's been such a traumatic event that they themselves have not got the ability to bring their child to school.
When you share your data with the ministry, if there's anything that concerns them, do they tell you anything?
To this time, we haven't been getting contacted by the ministry. Sometimes we contact the attendance services when we've got a concern about a family, but they, up until this day anyway, have been very, very busy, even with the additional funding that we got last year.
Today, the government's announced 82 new attendance officer roles as part of a $74 million package to combat truancy.
Our families are so stressed and so traumatised that we don't want a stranger banging on their door anyway. What they need is someone to work alongside them and help them through their challenges and work out a way to come back to school. So it isn't usually as straightforward as knocking on the door and saying, why isn't your child at school? You need to send them. It's more complex, and they might need support. They might need some financial help. They might need a caregiver to help them get the child to school. Lots of different possibilities, but it's very complex and time-consuming.
So are you saying that attendance officers don't really work for your kind of school?
For some families they do, where it's not complex. I think an attendance officer can be just like a little gentle reminder, and that's right, yes, we need to get back on track. So it's not that they never work, but the ones that are hardest to get back to school, it's less likely to work with them because there's usually really good reasons happening in the background that need some proper support.
Yeah, well, you talk about that proper support. Do you have the resources to deal with that and give proper support?
No, we're a school, so we don't get funded for anything. We actually employ a social worker of our own, out of our own operating grant. We're not funded for it, but he's stretched really, really thin with our families who don't have enough food, who need help with housing, who need help with MSD and allowances and all sorts of things. So he hasn't actually got much capacity. He works full-time, but even he hasn't got enough time to help with all of the families that would benefit from having that kind of support.
Is there anything else that will actually work, do you think, at keeping our kids in school?
Yeah, well, funding roles. So if we had money for a full-time nurse at our school, that would be reassuring for our families that even though their child's got these fragile medical conditions, there's a nurse on site who will help and be monitoring them at all times. That would be something. Good access to social workers who are a part of the school. The social workers that are out there in the community are different to when you work in a school. They build relationships with the family. They work for Somerville, not for Oranga Tamariki, and our families would know that they're there to support them, and that person could work through the issues with them. So if we had funding for staff who are able to focus on the needs of our families in our context, we would see a difference. And we would get past that 82%, up past 90%, I'm sure.
Yeah. So the answer, it sounds like, is not a traffic light or publishing data.
None of that's going to help attendance. All it does is tell you about it, but we already know about it. We don't need to know about it anymore. We already got the facts. What we need is some help to change it.
That's it for today. Thanks to Vaughan Quio, Belinda Johnston, as well as Ash Macdonald and the First Up team. The detail is funded through RNZ and NZ On Air. Arangi Powick engineered this podcast. Gwen McClure, Alexia Russell and Davina Zimmer produced it. I'm Tom Kitchen. Mā te wā.